That's not my sister." The words cut through the rain before the priest could finish the final prayer. I remember the exact weight of the umbrella in my hand, the way the black fabric trembled as wind rolled across the cemetery, the scent of wet earth and white lilies mixing in the cold October air. 6 feet below us lay Olivia Bennett, the woman I was supposed to marry in 3 months. I had chosen the casket myself. Dark mahogany, polished, untouchable, permanent. I didn't turn around at first. Grief does strange things to the mind. It makes you hear what you want to hear, or what you fear most. But then the crowd shifted. A ripple moved through the sea of black coats and lowered heads. And I felt it. That change in oxygen. That moment when the world tilts half an inch off its axis. I turned. She stood 20 feet away, no umbrella, rain sliding down her hair, her face pale against the gray sky. For a second, my heart stopped doing its job. Same eyes, same sharp cheekbones, same small scar near her right eyebrow from a childhood fall she once told me about at 2 in the morning when she couldn't sleep. My chest tightened so hard I thought I might collapse right there beside the grave. "Olivia had a twin," she said, her voice steady despite the cold. "My name is Evelyn." No one moved. Even the wind seemed to pause. I studied her like a threat assessment, like a business deal gone wrong. I built my empire by spotting lies before they formed. But this wasn't a lie I could immediately dismantle. I had identified Olivia's body myself. I had held her hand in a sterile hospital room under fluorescent lights that hummed like distant static. I had signed papers. I had watched that casket lowered inch by inch into the ground. "You're mistaken," I said, though my voice didn't carry the authority it usually did. It carried something else. Doubt. She walked closer. Not hesitant. Not dramatic. Just certain. Raindrops clung to her lashes, but she didn't blink them away. "I didn't know about you," she said. "And you didn't know about me." That's how she wanted it. The priest cleared his throat, uncomfortable. My security team shifted subtly behind me, waiting for instruction. I gave none. Because I couldn't. Because every memory I had of Olivia suddenly felt unfinished, like a book missing its final chapter. Evelyn stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could see the faint tremor in her hands, close enough to notice that her ring finger was bare. Olivia had worn mine every day. "The car explosion wasn't meant for her," Evelyn said quietly. "It was meant for you." The rain grew heavier, tapping against the casket lid before it disappeared into the earth. And for the first time since I buried the woman I loved, I felt something other than grief. I felt the beginning of a question I wasn't ready to answer. What if I hadn't buried the whole truth? The rain did not stop after she said it. It fell harder, heavier, like the sky had decided this was not finished yet. I stared at Evelyn Bennett while the casket disappeared into the ground, inch by inch, the ropes sliding through the gloved hands of the cemetery workers. "Meant for you." The words echoed in my head louder than the priest's prayer. I had spent 6 months believing I failed to protect the woman I loved. Now this stranger with Olivia's face was suggesting something worse. That Olivia had died because of me. "You are making a serious accusation," I said quietly. My voice had returned to its usual calm, the tone that kept men loyal and enemies careful. But inside, something was shifting. Evelyn did not flinch. She did not look intimidated by the black SUVs lining the gravel path or the men standing a few steps behind me. She looked tired and determined. "I am stating a fact," she replied. "Olivia called me the night before she died." My chest tightened. Olivia had told me she was visiting a friend that evening. She had kissed me on the cheek and promised to be back before midnight. I remember checking my watch at 11:30. I remember the call at 1:15 in the morning. I remember the sterile white walls of the hospital corridor. "That is impossible," I said. Her phone records were reviewed. "By your people," Evelyn answered. "Not by me." The crowd had thinned by then. Most of the guests were retreating to their cars, uncomfortable with a confrontation they did not understand. The priest offered a polite nod and left us alone with the fresh mound of dark soil. I stepped closer to her, close enough to see that her eyes were not an exact match. Olivia's had carried warmth, a softness she showed only to me. Evelyn's were sharper, guarded. "If you were telling the truth," I said, "then explain why Olivia never mentioned you." Evelyn swallowed, rain tracing the curve of her jaw. "Because she was protecting me." The wind lifted slightly, carrying the scent of damp grass and something metallic from the city beyond the cemetery gates. I felt the weight of every decision I had made in the last decade pressing against my ribs. From what? I asked. She held my gaze. From your world. Silence stretched between us. I had built that world carefully, brick by brick, contract by contract. Controlled. Calculated. Clean on the surface. Dangerous underneath. Olivia had known exactly who I was when she accepted my ring. She had told me she was not afraid. But perhaps she had been afraid for someone else. She said if anything ever happened to her. Evelyn continued, her voice quieter now. I should find you. That you would know how to uncover the truth. The statement should have felt like trust. Instead, it felt like a burden. Because if there was another layer to Olivia's death, it meant someone had played a deeper game than I realized. And I do not tolerate games I do not control. I looked down at the grave once more. The earth was smooth now. Final. Except it no longer felt final at all. I turned back to Evelyn. If you are lying, I said evenly, you will regret stepping into my life. She did not step back. If I am telling the truth, she replied, then someone inside your life already betrayed you. And for the first time since the explosion that took Olivia from me, I felt something colder than grief. I felt suspicion. By the time we left the cemetery, the sky had turned a deeper shade of gray, the kind that presses down on your shoulders and makes even a 10-minute drive feel heavy. I did not invite Evelyn into my car. She followed in a rideshare behind the line of black SUVs that moved through Manhattan traffic like a quiet procession. I watched her vehicle in the rearview mirror the entire way. I did not know whether she was a witness, a liability, or the only honest person in my life. When we reached my townhouse on the Upper East Side, I stepped out first. The brownstone looked the same as it had that morning. Clean steps, iron railing, windows reflecting a city that never paused for grief. 6 months ago, Olivia had stood on those steps laughing about how the ivy made the place look less intimidating. I had told her I liked intimidating. She had told me I liked control more. Inside, the air smelled faintly of leather and cedar. My staff knew better than to hover. They disappeared without being asked. Evelyn walked in slowly, her gaze scanning the high ceilings, the framed artwork, the quiet symmetry of a life built on order. She was here, she said softly. It was not a question. I nodded once. I led her into my study. The room was lined with dark shelves and a desk that faced the window overlooking 72nd Street. I remained standing. She remained standing. No one sat when the truth was still uncertain. Start from the beginning, I said. My voice was steady again. Measured. When did Olivia contact you? Evelyn drew a slow breath. 3 days before the explosion, she sent me an email from an address I did not recognize. She said she finally felt safe enough to reach out. My jaw tightened. Safe enough. Around me. In my world. And the night before? I asked. She called from a private number. Evelyn continued. She sounded anxious. Not afraid of you. Afraid of something inside your organization. The word organization landed between us like a weight. I built my network carefully. Loyalty was currency. Silence was survival. Did she give a name? I asked. No, Evelyn said. But she told me if anything happened, I should not trust the man closest to you. The room felt smaller. I thought of Daniel Hayes, my chief of operations for 8 years. I thought of the quiet efficiency with which my security team handled every detail of the investigation. I thought of how quickly the narrative of a tragic accident had been sealed. You understand what you are implying? I said quietly. Evelyn met my eyes without hesitation. I understand that my sister is buried 6 feet under because she knew something she should not have known. The city outside hummed with distant sirens and passing traffic. Normal sounds. Ordinary life continuing. I moved to my desk and opened a drawer. Inside was Olivia's engagement ring, the one recovered from the scene and returned to me in a velvet box. I placed it on the polished wood between us. If she feared someone near me, I said, my reflection faint in the window behind Evelyn's identical face, then that person will surface. I looked at her fully then, not as a ghost of the woman I lost, but as a separate presence, a variable I had not accounted for. Until we uncover the truth, I added, my voice lower now, colder, you stay where I can see you. She did not argue. She did not step back. Good, she said softly, because I did not come here to leave. And for the first time since I lowered Olivia into the ground, I realized this was no longer about mourning. It was about uncovering a secret that had been hiding in plain sight. Sleep did not come that night. I stood in my study long after Evelyn's footsteps faded down the hallway, staring at the engagement ring resting on my desk like it might speak if I waited long enough. The city outside pulsed with yellow cab lights and distant horns, ordinary life unfolding in 10-minute intervals, while mine felt suspended in a single unanswered question. If Olivia had been afraid of someone close to me, then I had missed the signs. And I do not miss signs. I replayed our final week together in precise detail. The way she had lingered near the window one evening, watching traffic instead of television. The way she had asked, casually, how much I trusted Daniel Hayes. I had laughed then, told her Daniel had been with me since I was 25, that loyalty like his could not be bought. She had not laughed back. I remember that now. At 8 the next morning, I called Daniel into the townhouse under the pretense of reviewing a new real estate acquisition in Brooklyn. He arrived exactly on time, tailored navy suit, calm expression, tablet in hand. You look like you did not sleep, he observed lightly as he stepped into my study. Grief has a schedule of its own. I watched him carefully, noting the subtle shift in his posture when he saw the ring on my desk. We need to revisit Olivia's accident, I said evenly. Daniel's jaw tightened for half a second before smoothing. We closed that investigation, he replied. Vehicle malfunction. Confirmed by 2 independent analysts. I want a third, I said. And I want complete access to every internal communication from the week before it happened. He held my gaze. 8 years of partnership rested in that silence. Is there a reason for this sudden concern? He asked. I did not blink. I am done accepting convenient explanations. The air between us grew dense. Daniel nodded slowly. Of course. I will arrange it. When he left, I remained still for a full minute, listening to the echo of the front door closing. Something in his tone had shifted. Not fear. Not yet. But awareness. Downstairs, I found Evelyn standing in the kitchen, fingers wrapped around a mug of coffee she had not touched. She looked smaller in daylight, less like a ghost, and more like a woman carrying a weight she had never asked for. He suspects something, she said quietly. Daniel? I asked. She nodded. Olivia mentioned him once. She said he knew too much about your schedule, about your movements. I felt a cold clarity settle in my chest. Information is power. In my world, whoever controls information controls outcomes. If someone had anticipated my location the night of the explosion, it meant my routine had been studied carefully. Did Olivia tell you anything else? I asked. Evelyn hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket. She placed a folded piece of paper on the marble countertop. It was worn at the edges, like it had been opened and closed too many times. She mailed this to me 2 days before she died, Evelyn said softly. I unfolded it slowly. A list of numbers, coordinates, dates, and at the bottom, in Olivia's unmistakable handwriting, a single sentence. If you are reading this, trust no one who stands beside him. I felt the room narrow around me. For years, I believed danger came from outside threats, from competitors who underestimated me. I never considered that betrayal might have been standing within arm's reach. I looked at Evelyn, at the identical eyes that once looked at me with love and now looked at me with urgency. From this moment forward, I said quietly, folding the paper once more, we assume every move is being watched. Outside, a black sedan slowed briefly in front of the townhouse before continuing down the block. Maybe coincidence. Maybe not. And for the first time, I understood that Olivia's death was not the end of a story. It was the opening move of something far more deliberate. The sedan that slowed in front of my townhouse did not return that night, but I did not mistake absence for safety. I have learned that patience is often more dangerous than aggression. By 10 in the morning, I had 3 separate teams quietly reviewing internal communication logs from the week before Olivia's death. Not through official channels. Not through Daniel. If there was a leak inside my organization, I would find it without announcing the search. Evelyn sat across from me in the study, the morning light revealing subtle differences between her and her sister. Olivia used to tuck her hair behind her left ear when she was thinking. Evelyn crossed her arms instead, holding herself together like she expected the room to turn hostile at any moment. She told me she discovered something financial, Evelyn said softly. Transfers that did not match her usual structure. I leaned back in my chair, fingers steepled. You understand most of my operations are compartmentalized. She said that was the problem, Evelyn replied. Someone was moving money under the cover of compartmentalization. The words settled heavily between us. Money leaves trails. Trails leave motives. If someone had been siphoning funds or redirecting investments, exposure could destroy more than reputations. It could dismantle alliances built over years. I turned my monitor toward her and pulled up a secure ledger. These are the approved transfers from that week, I said. All clean. Evelyn leaned forward, studying the screen. Her brow furrowed in a way that made my chest tighten unexpectedly. Olivia said the transfers were small, she murmured. So small they would not trigger alerts. But consistent. A quiet strategy. One that relied on no one looking too closely. I opened another window and began scanning microtransactions that normally would not interest me. At first, everything appeared ordinary. Utility holdings. Property maintenance. Consulting retainers. Then I saw it. A series of payments routed through a shell consulting firm in Queens. $12,000 at a time. Every Friday. For 8 consecutive weeks before the explosion. My jaw tightened. The firm name was unfamiliar, but the approving signature was not. Daniel Hayes. The air in the room shifted. I felt it physically, like pressure building behind my ribs. He handles operational discretion, I said slowly, though I was speaking more to myself than to Evelyn. He would not need my authorization for amounts this small. That is why it works, Evelyn said. She did not sound triumphant. She sounded afraid. I picked up my phone and sent a brief message to one of my analysts outside the city. Independent. Unconnected to Daniel. Within minutes, a reply came back. The consulting firm in Queens did not exist beyond a rented mailbox and a digital address. No staff. No real clients. Just transactions. Clean. Invisible. Intentional. I stood and walked to the window overlooking 72nd Street. Traffic moved normally. People crossed at the light. A woman pushed a stroller past the townhouse as if nothing in the world had shifted. But it had. Behind me, Evelyn spoke again, quieter this time. If he was diverting funds, maybe Olivia confronted him. I closed my eyes briefly. I pictured Olivia in this very room, her voice calm but firm, asking questions Daniel did not expect. She was intelligent, curious. She never accepted surface answers. If she discovered this, I said slowly, then she became a liability to someone who depended on her silence. I turned back to Evelyn. The resemblance no longer felt like a cruel trick of fate. It felt deliberate, as if the past had returned in a different form to finish what had been interrupted. We proceed carefully, I said. We do not accuse. We observe. Outside, the same black sedan from the night before passed the townhouse again, slower this time. And I understood something with unsettling clarity. Whoever had orchestrated the quiet transfers might already know I was looking. Night fell heavier than usual, as if Manhattan itself understood that something inside my walls had shifted. I did not cancel my dinner meeting with Daniel. Routine is camouflage, and I needed him comfortable. The restaurant on Park Avenue was discreet, low lighting, white tablecloths, conversations soft enough to hide intent. Daniel arrived precisely at 7:30, composed as always, offering condolences once more for Olivia, as if repetition might make the loss simpler. I watched him the way I watch markets before they collapse, looking for the tremor beneath the surface. The third analyst confirmed. The malfunction, he said smoothly after we ordered. It was an unfortunate mechanical cascade. No external interference. I took a slow sip of water. Interesting, I replied, because I did not request an update. A pause. Subtle. Measurable. I assumed you would want closure, he said. Closure. The word felt hollow. I leaned back in my chair. Tell me about the consulting firm in Queens. His expression did not fracture, but his fork stopped halfway to his plate. Operational discretion, he answered. Temporary vendor for off-book negotiations. Strange, I said calmly. The vendor appears to exist only as a mailbox and a website created 3 months ago. The ambient noise of the restaurant continued around us. A couple laughed softly near the bar. Glassware chimed. Daniel set his fork down carefully. You had someone dig, he observed. I always dig, I replied, especially when money moves without context. He folded his hands on the table, mirroring my posture. If you are implying misconduct, say it directly. I studied his face, searching for the smallest sign of strain. I am implying nothing, I said. I am observing that $12,000 left my accounts every Friday for 2 months before Olivia's death. His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. Those funds were allocated to secure information. From whom? I asked. A competitor exploring expansion into our territory. He maintained eye contact. Too steady. Too rehearsed. And this competitor required 8 consecutive payments. I asked quietly. A flicker. There. Information is rarely immediate, he replied. I nodded slowly, as if satisfied. Of course. Dinner ended without raised voices, without accusation. That was intentional. When we stepped outside onto the sidewalk, the air carried a hint of rain. Daniel adjusted his coat. You are letting grief cloud your judgment, he said evenly. Be careful who you begin to distrust. I held his gaze. I am always careful. His car pulled away first. Mine remained parked at the curb. I watched the taillights disappear into traffic before speaking. Follow him, I instructed my driver quietly. Inside the townhouse, Evelyn stood near the window again, watching the street like she expected it to answer her. Did he deny it? She asked. He justified it, I replied. I loosened my tie and moved toward the study. Which is more dangerous? My phone vibrated in my hand minutes later. A message from the team trailing Daniel. He did not go home. He turned south, toward Queens, toward a block that contained nothing but warehouses and one rented mailbox. I stared at the glowing screen. Money does not disappear by accident. Loyalty does not fracture without motive. And men who have nothing to hide do not visit empty buildings at 9 at night. I looked at Evelyn, at the quiet determination in her identical eyes. He is either covering something, I said softly, or someone is covering him. Outside, thunder rolled across the city, low and distant. And I realized the storm we were stepping into had been building long before Olivia ever reached out to her sister. The warehouse in Queens looked exactly like the kind of place that hides nothing and everything at the same time. Corrugated metal walls. One dim security light above a side entrance. No visible activity. My team kept their distance, parked half a block away, engines idling softly in the humid night air. I watched the live feed on my phone from a discreet camera positioned across the street. Daniel's sedan sat near the curb, headlights off. He stepped out alone, coat collar lifted against the wind, and walked toward the side door with the confidence of someone who had been there before. He did not hesitate. He did not look around. He entered. How long has he been inside? I asked quietly. 3 minutes, my analyst replied through the secure line. 3 minutes is long enough to exchange an envelope. Long enough to confirm a partnership. Long enough to reinforce a secret. I felt something unfamiliar press against my ribs. Not anger. Not yet. Disappointment. Loyalty is not a contract you sign once. It is a currency you maintain. If Daniel had chosen to redirect that loyalty, then he had underestimated me. The camera feed flickered slightly as a truck passed between the lens and the building. When the image cleared, a second vehicle had pulled up behind Daniel's car. Black, tinted windows. No plates visible from that angle. Do we recognize it? I asked. Running it now, the analyst responded. The side door opened briefly. A figure stepped out first. Not Daniel. Taller. Broader shoulders. The posture of someone accustomed to command. My pulse slowed instead of rising. Calm is an advantage. Daniel followed seconds later. The two men stood under the security light, their conversation hidden by distance but their body language clear. Controlled. Purposeful. No surprise. This was not an accidental meeting. The second vehicle is registered to a shell company, my analyst said. Connected to a logistics firm expanding from Chicago. Chicago. I knew that market. Aggressive. Ambitious. Hungry for New York access. The pieces aligned too cleanly to ignore. Small weekly transfers. A phantom consulting firm. And now a quiet meeting in a warehouse after 9 at night. Keep recording, I instructed. Inside the townhouse, Evelyn waited. I had left her with 2 security personnel I trusted without question. When I returned an hour later, the sky threatened rain again, thick clouds pressing low over the city. Evelyn looked up from the living room sofa as I entered. You saw him, she said. It was not a question. I nodded once. He is not acting alone. I removed my coat slowly, placing it over the back of a chair. Chicago is positioning itself. Her expression tightened. So Olivia discovered a partnership. Or a betrayal disguised as one. I replied. I walked to the window, watching headlights blur along 72nd Street. If Daniel promised them access to my operations, he would need leverage. Leverage like your schedule, Evelyn whispered. Leverage like knowing where you would be. I turned to her fully. The resemblance no longer startled me. It steadied me. The explosion happened on a night my route changed at the last minute, I said quietly. Only 3 people were informed. Evelyn's breath caught slightly. Daniel, she said. I did not answer. I did not need to. Outside, the first drop of rain hit the glass. Then another. Slow. Measured. And in that steady rhythm, I understood something with absolute clarity. If Daniel had aligned himself with Chicago, then Olivia had not died because she asked questions. She had died because she learned the wrong answer. The rain did not stop that night. It traced slow lines down the townhouse windows while I stood in the dark, replaying every detail of the explosion that took Olivia from me. The route change. The last-minute call. The 3 names who knew. Daniel, my head of security, and Olivia herself. I had assumed the danger came from outside competitors. I had never considered that the threat could have been guided from within. Evelyn stepped into the study quietly, barefoot on polished wood, holding the folded note Olivia had. Mailed her. If Daniel aligned with Chicago, she said softly, then the explosion was not random. It was leverage. I turned toward her. Leverage requires certainty, I replied. And Daniel is careful. He would not risk everything without assurance. My phone vibrated on the desk. A secure message from the team still monitoring Queens. Daniel had left the warehouse. The second vehicle remained inside for another 15 minutes before departing in the opposite direction. The analyst attached still images. Grainy. Distant. But clear enough to confirm a handshake under the security light. Agreement. Coordination. I exhaled slowly. He is negotiating access, I said. Chicago wants distribution routes, supplier contracts, political insulation. Daniel is offering what he believes I will not notice. Evelyn crossed her arms again, the habit she used when steadying herself. Olivia must have seen those payments, she whispered. She must have followed the pattern. I nodded. And she confronted the wrong person. Silence settled between us, heavy but focused. This was no longer speculation. It was architecture. Transfers. Meetings. Adjusted schedules. If Daniel had known about my last-minute route change that night, then he had possessed the ability to redirect information. Perhaps not intending to harm Olivia. Perhaps not caring who was in the car at all. The thought chilled me more than anger would have. I moved to the desk and opened a secure channel to my head of security, Marcus Lane. Review every internal access log from the night of the explosion, I instructed. Focus on route modifications. I want timestamps. Exact minutes. Marcus did not ask questions. He understood tone. Within 20 minutes, the data appeared on my screen. The route change had been logged at 7:42 in the evening. 3 minutes later, Daniel accessed the system remotely. 2 minutes after that, an outgoing encrypted message was sent from his device to an unknown server. I felt the truth settle with clinical precision. 5 minutes. That was the window between knowledge and transmission. He knew. Evelyn said quietly, reading my expression before I spoke. He knew you would not be in that car. I looked at her carefully. Or he believed I would. The distinction mattered. If Daniel thought I was still in the vehicle, then the explosion was an attempt to remove me entirely. If he knew I had changed routes, then the target was anyone left behind. Either scenario carved the same conclusion into my mind. Olivia's death was collateral in a negotiation she never agreed to join. I walked to the window again. The city lights blurred in the rain, reflections stretching like uncertain futures across wet pavement. Chicago believes I remain unaware, I said slowly. Daniel believes he has control. I turned back to Evelyn, whose identical eyes now held something steadier than grief. We give them both exactly what they expect. And what is that? She asked. I allowed a faint, controlled smile. Silence. Outside, the rain intensified, washing the streets clean while beneath the surface, currents shifted. Betrayal does not announce itself loudly. It moves in careful increments. And now that I could see the pattern, I intended to redraw it. Silence is only useful if you know how to weaponize it. The next morning, I did not confront Daniel. I did not restrict his access. I did not freeze the questionable accounts. Instead, I approved 2 new expansion proposals and CC'd him on both, giving him exactly what he expected to see. Confidence. Routine. Trust. If he believed I suspected nothing, He would continue moving pieces, and every move would leave a trace. Evelyn watched me from across the study as I signed off on documents that looked harmless on the surface. "You are giving him more control," she said quietly. "I am giving him rope," I replied. My phone buzzed with a secure update from Marcus. The encrypted message Daniel sent the night of the route change had been partially reconstructed. The receiving server traced back to a logistics intermediary with ties to Chicago's expansion network. No direct admission, no explicit confession, but proximity is a language of its own. I forwarded the data to a secondary analyst outside my usual circle. Redundancy prevents blind spots. By noon, Daniel requested a meeting. I agreed immediately. When he stepped into my office at headquarters, he carried his usual composed expression, tablet tucked under his arm. Floor-to-ceiling windows behind me framed the East River in gray light. "Chicago is pressing for clarity," he began. "They are willing to formalize a partnership if we signal openness." I leaned back in my chair, fingers steepled exactly as I had during dinner the night before. "And do you believe we should?" I asked evenly. He did not hesitate. "Expansion requires adaptation." "At what cost?" I asked. A flicker again. Brief. Calculated. "Temporary compromise," he said. "Long-term gain." I studied him in silence long enough to make the room uncomfortable. He filled it with rationale. Market data. Distribution charts. Revenue projections. Everything precise. Everything plausible. If I did not know about the shell transfers. If I had not seen the warehouse footage. If Olivia had never reached out to her sister. I nodded slowly. "Prepare a draft proposal," I said. "But keep it contained." Relief passed across his features too quickly to miss. "Of course," he replied. When he left, I remained still, replaying his tone in my mind. Not defiant. Not nervous. Certain. Certainty is dangerous when it is built on deception. That evening, I drove with Evelyn to a quiet rooftop overlooking Midtown. She needed air. I needed perspective. The skyline glowed in precise lines of light. Each building standing because its foundation held. "If he believes you are considering Chicago," she said softly, leaning against the railing, "he will escalate." I nodded. "He will test loyalty inside my organization. He will reposition assets." "And if he suspects you know?" she asked. I looked out over the city I had shaped for years. "Then he will accelerate." A vibration interrupted the quiet. Marcus again. An internal access alert. Daniel had requested archived footage from the night of the explosion. My gaze sharpened. He was checking the same ground I was. "He is nervous," Evelyn whispered after reading my expression. "No," I said calmly. "He is preparing." The wind moved through the rooftop, cool against my skin. Below us, traffic flowed without interruption. Daniel believed he was building an exit strategy with Chicago. Chicago believed they were gaining leverage over New York. Neither understood that I had already mapped the fault lines beneath them. I turned to Evelyn, her identical eyes reflecting the city lights. "Tomorrow," I said quietly, "we stop reacting." She held my gaze. "And start." I allowed a controlled breath to leave my chest. Setting the trap. The trap began with an invitation. Not a threat. Not an accusation. An invitation wrapped in opportunity. The next morning I announced a private strategy session at headquarters, a limited room. Only senior leadership, including Daniel. Topic: potential West Coast alignment and accelerated capital restructuring. The message was deliberate. Chicago would hear about it within the hour. Daniel would make sure of that. I watched the internal server logs as the calendar alert propagated through the system. 20 minutes later, Daniel accessed the encrypted channel he used the night of the route change. Predictable. He was informing someone that movement was happening. Good. Let them believe momentum was shifting in their favor. By 3 in the afternoon, the boardroom was prepared. Floor-to-ceiling glass. Manhattan skyline behind us. Long walnut table polished to a mirror shine. I took my seat at the head, calm, measured, composed. Daniel sat 2 seats to my right, posture relaxed, pen aligned perfectly with his notepad. If betrayal had a uniform, it would look like that. "We are considering accelerated expansion," I began evenly. "Selective partnerships. Limited disclosure." Heads nodded around the table. I let silence stretch before continuing. "However, before we proceed, I want to review internal vulnerabilities." Daniel's pen paused. Barely. I projected a slide onto the screen. Financial flow charts. Microtransfers. Consulting allocations. All legitimate on the surface. Compartmentalization protects us, I continued. But it can also conceal risk. I shifted the slide. A map of transaction routes appeared, red lines branching from New York to Chicago. I did not look at Daniel immediately. I let the room absorb it first. Murmurs. Subtle glances. These payments were authorized under operational discretion, I said calmly. Without my review. Now I looked at him. His expression did not break. Standard practice, he replied smoothly. As outlined in our internal charter. I nodded once. Correct. Which is why I amended the charter last night. A new document appeared on the screen. Timestamped. Signed. Effective immediately. All discretionary transfers above $5,000 now required dual authorization. Retroactive audit initiated. The room shifted. Daniel's jaw tightened, just enough. You changed governance without consultation, he said carefully. I changed exposure. I corrected. I reached for the remote again. The next slide appeared. Security logs. Timestamp. 7:42 p.m. Route modification. 7:45 p.m. Remote system access. 7:47 p.m. Encrypted outgoing transmission. The air in the boardroom felt thinner. Coincidence is expensive, I said quietly. Especially when measured in minutes. No one spoke. Not yet. Daniel leaned back slowly. Are you suggesting I orchestrated sabotage? His tone remained controlled, but the undercurrent was sharper now. I am suggesting, I replied evenly, that someone leveraged privileged information for personal negotiation. I let the word negotiation linger. Chicago. Partnership. Access. And that someone underestimated how closely I review patterns. Silence again. Outside the glass, clouds rolled over the East River. Inside, alliances recalibrated in real time. Daniel's gaze held mine, calculating options, weighing denial against deflection. He chose neither. If Chicago approached me, he said slowly, it was to protect this organization from stagnation. There it was. Not denial. Justification. Evelyn's words echoed in my mind. Leverage. I folded my hands on the table. Protection does not require secrecy, I said quietly. And loyalty does not require redirection. The room understood. The board understood. Chicago would understand soon enough. I stood, signaling the end of the meeting. We will continue expansion, I concluded calmly. On my terms. As executives filed out, Daniel remained seated for half a second too long. Not defeated. Not yet. But aware that the ground beneath him was no longer stable. And for the first time since Olivia's death, I felt the balance shift back in my direction. Toi with grave NBNOI Dung Chuen Thun, A with circumflex M, Ton the hotel conference suite in Midtown was designed for discretion. Neutral walls. Thick carpet that swallowed footsteps. Floor-to-ceiling curtains pulled tight against the city lights. I arrived 10 minutes before Daniel's scheduled meeting, not through the main entrance, but through a private corridor reserved for executive clients who preferred not to be seen. Chicago's representative was already inside. Tall. Impeccable suit. The posture of someone accustomed to negotiating from perceived leverage. He looked up when I entered, surprise flashing across his face before being replaced by professional composure. Mr. Russo, he said carefully. I was expecting Daniel Hayes. I closed the door behind me without haste. You still are, I replied calmly. He is simply unaware that I will be joining. I took a seat at the long glass table, placing a slim folder in front of me. Inside were copies of the financial transfers, the reconstructed encrypted messages, and a drafted agreement already signed by 2 members of Chicago's board who preferred stability over opportunism. The representative studied me closely. We were under the impression, he began, that Mr. Hayes had authority to negotiate expansion. He had access. I corrected. Authority belongs to me. Silence settled over the room, controlled and deliberate. Chicago values partnerships, he said. We believe New York was open to collaboration. New York is open to strength. I replied evenly. Not to. Covert entry. I slid the folder across the table. He opened it, scanning the documents with increasing focus. The timestamps. The shell companies. The evidence that Daniel's communications had been monitored for weeks. His jaw tightened. This was not our intention, he said after a moment. Intent is irrelevant, I said quietly. Outcome is not. A knock interrupted us. Daniel stepped inside, stopping mid-stride when he saw me seated across from Chicago's representative. For a fraction of a second, his composure fractured. Then he recovered. "Adrian," he said evenly, "I did not realize you would attend." "You did not inform me," I replied calmly. He closed the door behind him. The air in the suite shifted. "This conversation was meant to protect our interests," Daniel began. "Protection does not require secrecy," I interrupted, repeating the words I had already offered him once. Chicago's representative remained silent, eyes moving between us, calculating risk. I leaned back slightly in my chair. "Here is the reality," I said evenly. "Chicago may expand into New York. With my knowledge. With my oversight. Under agreements drafted tonight." I let the words settle. "Or Chicago may attempt expansion through divided loyalty and discover that divided loyalty fractures quickly." Daniel's gaze hardened. "You are making this personal," he said. I held his stare without blinking. "You already did." The representative closed the folder slowly. "We prefer stability," he said at last. "We will renegotiate under your terms." I nodded once. "Good." Daniel remained standing, the illusion of control finally stripped away by light rather than confrontation. No raised voices. No threats. Just exposure. As the meeting concluded, Chicago's representative extended his hand to me first. Daniel watched the gesture in silence. When we stepped into the hallway afterward, Daniel walked beside me, quiet for several steps. "You could have spoken to me privately," he said. "I did," I replied softly. "You chose to negotiate anyway." The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside without looking back. In the reflection of the mirrored wall, I saw his expression clearly for the first time. Not defiant. Not confident. Cornered. And in that realization, I understood something simple and absolute. Betrayal loses its power the moment it is seen. The elevator doors closed, and the mirrored walls reflected a version of me that felt older than the man who had walked into that hotel an hour earlier. Not hardened. Clarified. Betrayal does not destroy you when you see it in time. It educates you. When I returned to the townhouse, the city had quieted into that late-night hum that feels almost honest. Evelyn was waiting in the living room, a single lamp casting warm light across the hardwood floors. She stood when I entered, searching my expression before asking the question. "It is done." I removed my coat slowly and placed it over the chair. "Chicago will renegotiate," I said evenly. "Under my terms." She studied me for another second. "And Daniel?" I walked to the window, looking out over 72nd Street where headlights moved in measured lines. "Daniel will resign tomorrow," I replied. "Publicly, it will be framed as strategic restructuring." She exhaled softly, not with relief, but with something closer to release. The tension that had been coiled around this house for weeks finally began to loosen. "He did not mean for Olivia to die," she said quietly. I closed my eyes for a brief moment. That was the truth I had already accepted. Daniel had aimed at power, not at her. But recklessness does not excuse consequence. Intent does not erase outcome, I said softly. He created a window. Someone else pulled the trigger. The room fell silent again, but it was no longer the heavy silence of suspicion. It was the quiet after a storm, when the air feels cleaner even if the ground is still wet. I turned to face her fully. For the first time since she appeared at the funeral, I did not see a ghost of the woman I lost. I saw Evelyn. Different posture, different steadiness, different strength. "Olivia reached out to you because she trusted you," I said, "and because she believed I would protect what she loved." Evelyn swallowed gently, her identical eyes reflecting something softer now. "She never stopped believing in you," she said. The words settled into my chest in a way that did not hurt. They anchored. For months, I carried guilt like a weight around my neck, convinced I had failed her. But the truth was more complex. I had built an empire strong enough to survive external threats. I had simply underestimated internal ambition. I walked to the desk and opened the drawer where her engagement ring had rested. I held it in my palm for a long second before closing my fingers around it. "I cannot change what happened," I said quietly, "but I can decide what happens next." Evelyn stepped closer, not hesitant, not uncertain. "And what is that?" she asked. I looked at her, not as a replacement, not as a reminder, but as a continuation of something unfinished. "We rebuild," I said, "without blind spots." Outside, the first light of dawn began to edge over the skyline, pale and deliberate. The city was still standing. So was I? And this time, I understood something that power alone had never taught me. You do not rule by controlling every shadow. You rule by knowing exactly which shadows deserve light.